Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share Dogman encounter horror stories. First story. My dog spoke to me. I need to figure out how to protect him. I was drunk the first time I heard it. At least, that's what I told myself. It was just past midnight, and I was slouched on my couch, TV murmuring some late-night infomercial. Baxter, my golden retriever, lay curled up beside me, his tail thumping lazily against the cushions. "Good boy," I muttered, scratching behind his ears. "Good boy," a voice whispered back. I sat up so fast my head spun. The house was quiet. The TV host droned on about non-stick pans. Baxter stretched, yawned, and settled back down. I stared at him. "Did you just—" My voice trailed off. He didn't react. I rubbed my face, let out a nervous laugh. Too much whiskey. Too little sleep. That had to be it. But then it happened again. And again. At first, it was simple, almost sweet. "Good boy. Love you. Sleep tight." A whispery echo of things I'd said to him before. Like a parrot. Then it got weird. "I watch you sleep." I try to laugh it off. Maybe I'd said that to him once as a joke, drunk or delirious. Maybe he was just repeating it back. Then one night, as I was locking up, he whispered, "You should lock the door." The hairs on my arms stood up. My hand froze over the deadbolt. The door was already locked. I turned to look at him. Baxter was lying by the stairs, staring at me, mouth closed. But I swear I still heard it, faint as a breath against my ear. "You should lock the door." I didn't sleep that night. I started testing it. "Baxter, what's 2 plus 2? I asked one morning, voice light, joking. He just wagged his tail. I chuckled. "All right, buddy. Say Baxter is the best dog." Nothing. Maybe I was losing it. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt him jump up, circle once, then settle at my feet. His warm breath puffed against my toes. I was drifting off when the whisper came again. "Don't turn around." A cold rush of adrenaline flooded my veins. My body stiffened. He was at my feet. His mouth wasn't near my ear. I swallowed hard. "Why?" I whispered. Silence. Slowly, I turned my head. Baxter was staring past me, eyes locked on something over my shoulder. Unblinking. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The whisper came again, softer than ever, but clearer than before. "Because it doesn't like to be seen." I shot up, flicked on the bedside lamp, heart hammering. Nothing was there. Just my empty room. Just my dog, staring. But this time his tail wasn't wagging. I didn't sleep. I left the lamp on, the TV humming in the background. Anything to keep the silence from creeping in. Baxter stayed at the foot of my bed, curled up but rigid, ears twitching at sounds I couldn't hear. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, that he wasn't really whispering, that none of this was real. But then, around 3 a.m., he growled. Not the playful, throaty grumble he made when I scratched his belly. This was low, deep, a sound that didn't belong in his throat. And he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the closet. A chill crawled up my spine. "Baxter," I whispered. "What is it?" His growl deepened, lips pulling back over his teeth. His body trembled, but he didn't move. The closet door was open. Just a crack. I was sure, so sure, that I had closed it. The whisper came again, but this time it wasn't soft. It was wet, sticking to the inside of my skull like breath against glass. "It knows you're awake." Something shifted behind the door. A rustle. The scrape of fabric against wood. "You should have locked the door." Baxter launched himself off the bed, snarling, charging the closet with more rage than I had ever seen in him. The door slammed open, and for one heart-stopping second I saw— No, I felt it. A shape. A wrongness. Something not meant to be seen. Baxter yelped, then whimpered, then went silent. The air in the room pressed against me, thick and heavy, a presence curling around my lungs. My legs wouldn't move, wouldn't run, wouldn't. The closet door creaked shut. Click. And just like that, it was over. Baxter lay motionless on the floor, his body limp, breath coming in shallow, rapid pants. I scrambled to him, hands shaking as I ran them over his fur. "Baxter, buddy, are you okay?" What the hell was that? He didn't look at me, didn't react, didn't whisper. He was fine, physically at least, and by the morning, he was up and moving again. It's been weeks since then. Baxter still eats, still wags his tail, still follows me from room to room. But he's not the same. He won't go near the closet, won't even look at it. And at night, when he curls up at my feet, I swear I can feel him trembling, like he's listening to something I can't hear. I don't know what was in my closet. I don't know how he started talking to me, but I know he was doing it to keep me safe, and I know that if something ever comes out of the closet again, I'll do what I can to protect him. Second story. I work for the DNR in a special unit that deals with dangerous cryptids. This is one of the methods we use when someone is attacked by a dogman. I suppose it's about time I told this story. I'm not getting any younger, and I think it's a story that needs to be passed on, considering the state of the world. This was in my early days at the DNR. That's the Department of Natural Resources, of course, in a unit jokingly called the Night Stalker Unit. It was our job to deal with the cases deemed CZ, that's classified zoological entities. Anything found in the natural world that requires special care and diplomatic contingencies. Dogmen, Sasquatch, merfolk, any of those entities which defy scientific conventions, display an intelligence similar to our own, or present a formidable threat to our species, which requires a high level of discretion and tact on our part. If someone has an encounter with a CZ, that's not something we look into other than to make sure they haven't gathered any evidence that might compromise the CZ's privacy. What concerns us are the cases of negative contact. If a company is attempting to develop an area which is causing distress to the local CZ population, if one or more hunters have been attempting to catch or kill a CZ, if a family or town has been targeted by one or more CZs in a dangerous way, or, as was the case I will describe here, someone turned up dead in an apparent attack by a CZ. This case happened in 83 Foot, back when I was still a greenhorn working under Connor Duncliffe, my mentor and a legend in the parks and wildlife crowd. We were called out to a park area known as the Land Between the Lakes, over by Kentucky and Tennessee. This was a fairly popular area for hunting, hiking, and camping. It was before the big summer rush that a family had parked their RV in the campground located in the northern part of the area to begin what would have been a perfect family summer camping trip. What they got instead was a nightmare beyond anything they thought was possible. The report came to us about 8 hours after a local had found the family dead. By then, the local police and park rangers had gone over the whole terrible scene. The family had been butchered, ripped to shreds by either a wild animal or an axe murderer they didn't know, which is how it ended up on our desk. Connor and I went to the scene and tried to smooth things over with the locals, get them busy with crowd control and patrolling. Anything to minimize the trauma they would experience having to process a scene like this. The campsite looked like the killing floor of a slaughterhouse. The father was laying just outside the door of the camper, split down the middle. The shotgun at his side had only been fired once, and based on the evidence hadn't managed to hit anything but dirt. Inside the camper, the little boy was in pieces all around the main living area. He couldn't have been a day over 11. Further in the back, we found the mother, in the bathroom at the rear of the camper. The door to the bathroom had been torn off the hinges and crushed like a tin can. We found defensive wounds on her, so she had tried to put up a fight at least. Connor was the one who noticed there were clothes and dolls for a young girl in the camper as well. We searched the area, hoping and praying that she got away and hid somewhere. We found her not 40 yards away, 20 feet up in a pine tree, torn apart and stuck there on a branch the way shrikes will stick bugs on a blackthorn. I had never seen something so terrible before. Connor looked like he was about to faint or lose his lunch. I'd never seen him so mad. After we had both gathered ourselves, we started in on the case. All evidence pointed to a Dogman attack, what we call the black dog case of the DNR. The father had been drawn out, most likely by a noise or a tap on the camper. Once he was dispatched, the mother and children barricaded themselves in the bathroom, and the CZ tore the door off, killed the mother, and proceeded to drag the children out to be slaughtered. Connor was convinced there had been more than one, which meant this wasn't a Rouge loner and meant this was a serious threat to the people in the area. Something had to be done, and I had no idea what that might mean. After we made sure the teams had everything under control, we went back to the motel we had rented in the area. I remember Connor spending most of the night on the terrace outside, smoking like a chimney and looking like he was considering something truly unpleasant. The next morning, I couldn't be sure he had ever managed to sleep, but he looked at me hard and told me there was a way this could be fixed if I had the courage and was sure I wanted it fixed. I told him I'd do anything to make things right for that family, and he nodded with a condemned expression. He told me to go and fetch supplies for a camping trip for at least 3 or 4 days. We had tents and lights and things like that in the truck, so I got food and water and other necessities. When I got back, I saw he had a bag of evidence taken from the scene. When I started to ask about it, he just nodded and checked the supplies. We drove further north into Kentucky, deep into the country where the road turned to gravel and gravel to dirt. We seemed to be following an old logging road. When we came to a fence-marked protected land, we left the truck and hiked deeper into the woods for most of the day. On the way, I noticed Connor picking prairie sage by the handful and stowing it in a bag. We had brought a bow and a few arrows, and Connor told me to keep an eye out for any game we could bring down. I spotted a decent-sized jackrabbit, and we managed to bag it, even though I wasn't much of a bow hunter. It was nearly night when we reached a spot flat and open enough to set up on. Once camp was set up and he got a fire going, he tossed in a handful of the sage he collected. The green leaves created an acrid, heavy smoke that permeated the area. It reminded me of my grandmother, who used to burn sage around her house all the time. I asked him if I should clean up the rabbit to make us some food, but he said the rabbit wasn't for us. I had been running through different explanations for what we were out there to do, but nothing made enough sense, so I finally had to ask. Connor looked up at the red-orange fading light and drew in a deep breath. What we're here to do, he said, is something we do not do lightly. I haven't done it in going on 20 years now, and I don't suppose I'll ever need to do it again. It was taught to me by my grandfather and his grandfather before him, and before him, the Indians who were either taught by their grandfathers or came up with it on their own. You know that the creatures who were responsible for that horror back at the park, they've been around longer than any of us before the settlers, before the Indians. Our relationship with them has changed throughout our shared history. Sometimes they would have the upper hand, and we'd live in fear of the woods, or we'd have the upper hand, and they'd be forced back deeper to keep away from our guns and machines. As you know, they are highly intelligent, on a different level than we are, I suppose. I believe they were a sort of evolutionary crossroad where the human race split between the thinking society and the primal tribes. They evolve along a different path, a more natural path, you might say. They may not be able to speak our language or build cities like we can, but they're just as sharp, just as observant and adaptive as we are, perhaps even more so, seeing as how they don't have language or histories cluttering up their thinking. The point is, they're not animals in the way wolves or bears are to us. Evolutionarily speaking, they're on the same level as we are, and because of this, we have to consider our relationship with them diplomatically. We don't want to live in fear of them, and they want to be left alone. To maintain this peace, the ancient humans had devised a line of contact between us in the event of some unacceptable event, a way of reaching out and making peaceful contact. Obviously, this is not something either side enjoys in any sense. The Dogmen have cultivated a powerful distrust of humans over the centuries, and I can't say I blame them for that. They respect us as a threat, but they despise us as a species. This, of course, is not true of all of them. Like us, there are some among them more prone to peace and coexistence, just as there are others who would wipe us out given the chance. That is why this contact is extremely risky for us. I remember feeling distant, like what he was saying was bouncing around in my head, and I couldn't get a hold of it. Was he seriously telling me we were about to meet with one of the Dogmen? A whole pack of them even? For what? To talk to them? Ask for their help? I just sat like a statue as he talked, and threw more sage on the fire. The ritual, which is what my granddaddy called it, was to be followed to the letter. The meeting place is deeper into the woods, and we're to bring no tools or weapons or even clothes. Nothing but the offering and the evidence. This would put us completely at their mercy, which is the only way they would let us get close. That was the first thing to land in my mind. No weapons? No clothes? I thought he might be trying to kid me, but when I looked at his face, I could see he wasn't just serious. He was scared. To see a man like Connor in terror was something I'll never forget. He tossed another clutch of sage on the fire and gestured to it. The sage burning, he said, was part of the ritual. The Indians believed it would ward off evil spirits in the area. My granddaddy had a different idea what it was. He called it an olfactory beacon of sorts. A strong smell to get their attention and one they associate with the contact ritual, letting them know we would be attempting contact. He lifted a branch of the sage to his nose before tossing it into the fire. We waited until the moon was high and the path was lit enough for us to walk in the dark. I was staring up at the moon through my tent wall when Connor called to me and said it was time. I felt my stomach do a gymnastics routine and crawled out to see the fire was out and Connor was already completely bare. I took off my clothes numbly and went to join him. I never felt so vulnerable as I did standing in that dark wood, naked and shivering. It wasn't cold, but I imagine I could have been mistaken for a eunuch. I was so nervous. I grabbed the rabbit we'd killed and sort of clutched it to my chest, trying to feel less naked. Before we set out, Connor grabbed a handful of the ashes from the fire and held it out, blowing a puff of soot over me before tossing the rest on himself. We walked and we walked. It seemed like we had walked until I was sure the sun would be coming up. Up until now, the forest had been wet with sound. Birds in the trees, bugs chirping and whirring. The whole orchestra of nature. But at some point, everything went quiet as a church hall. It was like someone found the volume knob on the woods and turned it off. I hesitated for a moment until I remembered Connor's instructions. Walk steady and calm. Keep your eyes on the path. Pay no mind to anything you might see or hear. And most importantly, you are not to look at anything if it should look at you. As we walked, the only sounds were the wind in the trees and the crunch of leaves beneath us, until I started to hear something moving in the woods to our left. Something big. I kept my eyes forward as the sound trailed us, matching our pace. Then came a sound to our right, a deep, low, guttural growl that made everything inside you shudder and clench. I had heard the researchers mention infrasound, a sort of low-frequency sound that can cause anxiety and feelings of dread in people. They said it could be detected in a tiger's roar and that our reaction to it might be tied to our ancestral fears. Maybe it wasn't tigers they were worried about after all. Either way, being there in the dark, with nothing between them and us, I can't begin to describe the terror I felt. As we walked, the two at our sides kept abreast of us. One of them jumped onto the path behind us and let out another growl that made my teeth vibrate before charging us. I could hear the crash of the leaves, feel the thuds of its feet hitting the dirt not 2 feet behind me. It took everything within me not to spin around and bolt for the wood line, screaming and pissing myself. I heard it slide to a stop and felt the dirt, and sticks it kicked up bounce off my calves, but I just kept walking and Connor did the same. I couldn't feel my body anymore, but I just focused all my sanity on walking and looking straight ahead. When Connor finally stopped, we had come to a clearing. The grass and prairie sage was a bright silver in the moonlight, which was so strong it looked to be daytime. For a moment we just stood. The forest was still and silent as a graveyard. Then I caught a glimpse of eyes reflecting the moonlight in the bushes ahead of us. A large shape emerged from the forest in front of us. It crawled forward on all fours, its black first seeming to absorb all light. A living silhouette with 2 glowing pearls where its eyes should be. 2 others emerge alongside it like bodyguards. One of them looked like spun silver in the moonlight, and its eyes held a spark like amber when you rub it against wool. The other had patches of black and eyes that glowed like the dying cinders of an old bonfire. I almost broke my composure when I felt hot breath on the back of my legs and heard a snuffling. I twitched involuntarily and the thing let out another low warning growl before touching its cold nose to my backside as it sniffed and circled me. Another black shape was circling Connor as well, and I couldn't see his face, but something about his calm demeanor settled the thundering in my ears. The dogman circling me growled again and tried to look up into my eyes, and I looked away quickly, dodging its stare like a nervous kid being confronted by an angry policeman. It lunged at me, and I heard the snap of its teeth and felt the rush of air as it bit the air in front of my crotch, sending a shudder through me that made me glad I had emptied my bladder before leaving. The large black dogman eyed us for a moment before shifting. Something inside it popped like a twig being snapped in a wet towel, and it slowly rose on its 2 legs. The other 2 followed suit. The 2 at its sides had to be 7 or 8 feet tall, but the black one had to be closer to 10 feet. I had never seen something so massive so close before. It almost blacked out the moon over us. Connor looked at me and made a gesture to the rabbit I held. I felt like I was in a slow-motion terror dream, and my body wouldn't respond. A low growl behind me snapped me out of it, and I stepped forward. I could feel the eyes on me like hot pokers held inches from my skin, waiting for an excuse to close the gap. I laid the rabbit at the feet of the largest, stepping into its shadow that seemed to be an extension of itself, as though I might be stepping into a vast, open mouth. A snort came from high above me, and I felt a snuffling at my hair. To my absolute horror, a nose entered my field of vision, then a muzzle, then the bright, bioluminescent pearls of its eyes. Something left me in that moment, like it had reached into me and taken something. What it was I couldn't be sure. I looked away from those points of light in the black mass before me with great difficulty. Then I stepped back, carefully moving to Connor's side once again. The largest sniffed at the rabbit before making a gesture to one of the attendants, who grabbed the hair in one hand. It looked like a gorilla holding a kitten, even though I thought the rabbit had been quite large for its species. It disappeared into the woods, and Connor took the bag of evidence from under his arm. He began to pull objects out and laid them on the ground before him. There was a piece of bloodied cloth, a wedding band stained black with blood, a child's shoe, and finally a lock of golden hair. The alpha sniffed at the items intently, growling low as it got to the hair. It stood at its full height and watched Connor as he pulled the last items from the bag. A clutch of fur found in the father's hand, saliva samples taken from the bodies, and small vial of urine-soaked dirt taken near the site. The alpha sniffed at these items and snorted before grunting and standing. It growled deeply for a moment before turning to disappear into the dark with a brief step, covering the distance to the trees like a cloud passing in front of the moon. The others soon followed, looking back at us with low warning growls. After they had gone, Connor and I just stood in shock until the sounds of the forest returned as quickly as they had gone. A great weight seemed to lift off me, and I felt like I might pass out. Connor took a long breath in and let out slow, shaking just the smallest bit. He looked at me and grinned. "I think she likes you," he said, and I almost fell over at that, my knees buckling slightly. The trip back to the camp seemed to happen in double time, like someone rewinding a tape. Once we found the lanterns, Connor and I pulled on our clothes and climbed into our tents without a word. I felt like I might never sleep again, my heart still thudding in my ears, but I ended up falling asleep almost as soon as my head hit the pillow. The next few days were spent camping and waiting. Connor had told me we had to stay in the area until we had gotten some indication that they had done something about our mutual problem. He told me about his first time performing the ritual of contact. It hadn't been here, though he said he had contacted this pack before. This was apparently something done all over the country. The ritual changes slightly in certain areas, but the purpose was the same. On the third night, we heard far-off howling, deep and piercing even at a distance. It sounded the way a coyote pack will sing in chorus, all baying and howling and yipping at different volumes and intervals. The next morning we found, laid on the ground before our campfire, 3 massive clawed hands severed at the wrist and lined up. Connor smiled when he saw it. Looks like they took care of it, he'd said, lifting one to examine it. He handed one to me, and it felt heavier than it looked, like holding a gun for the first time. The one hand was bigger than both my hands together, and the long claws at the end of each finger had to be 5 inches and retracted slightly. The fur on each was a different color, and each one was clearly a left hand. Connor dropped each into a separate bag and said the lab boys would be over the moon about these. They tended to collect their dead fairly religiously, so remains are difficult to come by. And then we packed up and went. We hadn't heard of any further activity in the area, and we told everyone we were authorized to tell that the situation was resolved and we had performed a highly successful contact. After that, I felt a bit like a celebrity at the DNR. It was something I'll never forget and something I wouldn't consider doing again unless the situation was dire. Although, with the reports we've been getting lately, it might be something we won't be able to do at all anymore very soon. We don't know why they've been becoming more active and aggressive lately, but it certainly makes the continued peace between us more and more unreliable. What that means for the future, I can only fear the worst. Third story. My wife keeps waking me up from sleepwalking. It's starting to creep me out. I love my wife, Jennifer, with all my heart. We've been together since 2006. Both of us in the 10th grade. Like anyone else that's been in a serious relationship, we've had our ups and downs. Nothing has ever seriously threatened our relationship, though. Not until recently, that is. Jen's been sleepwalking as of late. I know that doesn't sound like a big deal. Hell, a good amount of people sleepwalks. When Jen sleepwalks, though, it's downright creepy. It's almost as if she's possessed or something. I know it sounds like I'm being paranoid, but please hear me out. I don't know exactly what day it was that she started the sleepwalking. It was definitely within this past week. The first night wasn't horrible, a little odd, but nothing too crazy. I woke up to the sound of cupboards opening and closing. Not like she got in, grabbed a cup, and then closed it, but just repeatedly opening and closing them. It was like a child slamming the bedroom door while throwing a fit. I looked over my wife's side of the bed and noticed it was empty. I sighed and got out of bed, wiping the sleep from my eyes. "Jen, what's going on?" I called out as I walked down the hallway. Once I entered the living room, I was able to see the kitchen, and that's when I had my first thought run through my head. She was standing stiff as a board, head staring straight down at the ground. Her right hand was reaching above her head with the cupboard handle gripped tightly, opening then closing the door over and over. "Jen, what are you doing?" I was baffled. Her sleepwalking hadn't crossed my tired mind yet. She didn't stop. She stood in the exact same position, in the exact same rhythm, slamming the door. After staring at her with wide eyes for a few seconds, my brain finally woke up enough to realize she must have been sleepwalking. I'll admit, my heart was racing pretty good. I mean, come on. It's in the middle of the night, a pitch black house other than the hall light behind me. And I walk out to my wife standing like a zombie, repeatedly opening and closing a cupboard door. It's kind of a creepy sight to wake up out of a dead sleep, too. I shook my head and chuckled to myself a little. I walked over to Jen and placed my hand on her shoulder and gently guided her away from the kitchen. Thankfully, she didn't resist or anything. She mumbled a couple of incoherent words and allowed me to walk her back to bed. We went back to sleep, and that was that. For the first night anyway. The next day, I told Jen about her little sleepwalking incident. Instead of laughing like I thought she would, her face tensed and she looked very uncomfortable. "It's no big deal, babe. At first it did scare the shit out of me, though." I laughed, trying to comfort her. She gave a small smile and nodded. I found it very odd that she seemed bothered by a small sleepwalking incident, but didn't press it any further. Maybe she had an embarrassing memory or something, and as a result, she was embarrassed to sleepwalk. Either way, I figured if it happened again, I just wouldn't tell her about it. I honestly didn't think it would happen the next night as well. She never sleepwalked in the 14 years I've been with her. I figured the chances of it happening were pretty low. So I went about my day, not giving it another thought. Before I knew it, it was bedtime and Jen was fast asleep. I fell asleep soon after. Sometime in the middle of the night, I was woke up again. This time it sounded like a door opening and closing. My heart raced yet again as I rolled over to find Jen's side of the bed vacant. I rolled back out of bed and prepared to gently walk her back to bed. This time I kind of knew what to expect, so I wasn't quite as alarmed. As soon as I opened the bedroom door, I saw Jen. This time, however, she was standing in front of the bathroom door, which is located just 5 feet from our bedroom, right in the hall. Her head was craned to what looked like a very painful angle, and she was staring directly at me. If you walk down the hall and make a right-hand turn, there is our bathroom. Her body was facing straight towards the bathroom, and her head was turned my way, a direct 90-degree angle. Her chin was literally right on top of her right shoulder. Her eyes were open, so wide it looked like she snorted a line of coke or something. "Jen," I nervously called out. As soon as I said her name, she froze, mid-door stroke and all. It was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Then her lips curled into the biggest, widest grin I have ever seen in my 30 years of life. Goosebumps immediately covered my whole body as my heart slammed in my chest. This did not look like Jen at all. We sat staring at each other with neither of us moving a muscle. I was too afraid to move, in fear she would come charging at me or something. Finally, after maybe a minute or so, her smile slowly faded and she got back to opening and closing the door. I quietly stepped back into the bedroom and closed the door, making sure not to make a sound. I got back in bed, but couldn't fall back asleep. I just laid down listening to her open and close that door all damn night. Sometime right before daylight, I heard the door stop moving, followed by footsteps coming down the hall. My heart was beating 1,000 beats a minute as she approached. I rolled over and pretended I was asleep. She opened the door and walked up to the bed, slowly climbing back in. I laid as still as possible, so it seemed like I was asleep. After maybe 5 minutes, I heard her begin to snore, and that's when my heart finally slowed down to just about normal pace. The sound of our alarm clock blaring startled me, as I must have dozed off for a short while. The night's events fresh in my mind as I groggily got out of bed and got ready for work. Before I walked out the door, Jen woke up and gave me a kiss goodbye. I acted as if nothing had happened, not knowing how to approach the subject. I figured I'd maybe talk to her when I got home or something, but for now I needed to just get out and be by myself to get my thoughts together. Work dragged ass because I was dog-ass tired. I was halfway relieved, but halfway nervous as the workday came to an end. I calmed down a little by telling myself that tonight would be different. Tonight she wouldn't sleepwalk and everything would be okay. As I pulled in the driveway, another wave of nervousness washed over me. "This is your wife, damn it. Just talk to her." I whispered myself a little pep talk. I forced myself out of my truck and walked up the steps to my front door. I opened the door and was greeted by Yin's horrible taste of hip-hop music. All my worry washed away as I heard her singing loudly from the shower. I chuckled as I set my lunch pail down and walked in my room to sit down and relax. As I sat there, I debated with myself if I should talk to Jen about her sleepwalking or just let it go and hope tonight was different. After all, she didn't try to hurt me or anything. It just scared the living piss out of me. Eventually, I decided against talking to her, telling myself if it happened again or got worse, I would then talk to her. Satisfied with my decision, I closed my eyes and soon after fell asleep. Foz. I woke up hours later as it was dark outside. I jumped as a loud thump at my door startled me. I looked up and nearly shit my pants. Jen was standing with her back to me, stiff as ever, opening and closing her bedroom door. Once again, my heart started racing wildly as I attempted to stay still as possible. Moving my head slowly, I looked over at the clock. 6:23 p.m. Why is she doing this awake? I thought to myself as the door slammed in the background. Right next to the clock was a piece of paper that caught my attention as it wasn't there before. I slowly reached over and grabbed the paper, noticing writing on it. "Babe, I'm talking a quick nap. Dinner is in the fridge. Wake me up when you wake up. Love you." I thought to myself. I was too busy reading to notice how quiet the room had gotten. My heart started beating even faster as I slowly looked to where Jen was standing. I froze as I saw her. She was turned around slightly, her neck doing most of the turning. She had those same wild eyes and giant grin that she had the night before. We stared at each other again for what felt like an eternity before, out of nowhere, she turned and booked it down the hall. Her steps thundered through the house as she raced into what sounded like the kitchen. I heard a drawer slam open and silverware being tossed about. Instinctively, I jumped out of bed and ran straight for the bathroom, shutting and locking the door behind me. As soon as I turned the lock, I heard her footsteps booming back down the hallway to the bedroom. She stopped just a few feet away as she reached the entrance to our bedroom. I quietly climbed into the bathtub and closed the curtains behind me, afraid she would hear me. I almost jumped out of my skin. The footsteps started thundering through the house again. She ran through the house like that for over an hour before her booming footsteps finally stopped. I climbed out of the bathtub and put my ear to the door and listened closely. I breathed a huge sigh of relief as I heard soft snoring coming from the living room. This was my chance. I opened the bathroom door as quietly as I could, tiptoeing through the living room. I looked over at Jen, sleeping on the couch. On the ground next to her was the biggest kitchen knife we owned. I walked to the door and put on my shoes, grabbing the car keys as well. I slipped out the door, ran to my truck, starting it and peeling out as fast I could. I decided to check into a hotel for the night and try and think of what to do next. So here I am, Reddit, holding up in a cheap motel. Jen texted my like 10 times and called even more. I'm ignoring her attempts to reach me. I feel horrible. This is my wife, and I'm afraid to death of her. She keeps begging me through text to come home, or at least to respond. I'm on here to see if anyone has ever experienced anything like this before, and if so, did it stop? Please, any advice would be appreciated. I'll be sure to update if I get a handle on this, or if it gets worse. If you don't hear from me, well then I guess it's safe to assume she killed me. Wish me luck, everyone. Fourth story. Something is wrong with my dog. I live in a house in the suburbs of Oregon City. I originally moved here with my fiancée following a promotion at work. We figured it was time to stop living in separate apartments and attempt to settle down. After a rough year, we finally split. It was more than we were both ready for. It's whatever. When we first moved in, things were hectic with the fiancé and work and everything in my life. Katie and I were both constantly stressed. I was working long hours. She was finishing nursing school. We fought a lot. We argued about everything. Something had to break. Now it's just me and my 6-year-old golden retriever named Murphy. The house immediately felt different when Katie left. Of course, her personal things went with her when she packed up and moved on. But it was more than just her stuff. In this case, strange things began to crop up after she left. At first, I noticed little details here and there. Things out of place. They stood out enough to be notable. For example, after Katie left, the plants in my garden started to die one by one. Sure, I don't spend all day tending to the plants, but still I watered them every morning. It wasn't a big deal, just weird. Another time I came home from work and all the electronics in my house were unplugged. Again, weird. I would sometimes see or hear things in the house that didn't make a lot of sense. Once while I was cooking dinner, I heard someone whistling in the garage. Just a casual tune. Or at least, that's what it sounded like. I went out there and the garage was empty. Not a soul in sight. Sometimes at night the furnace turned on or off without warning. Doors would even creak shut in the middle of the night. Things went missing too. I was reading a book for a while, which I would always leave on the nightstand next to my bed. One morning when I woke up, it was gone. At the time, I thought Murphy might have dragged it off somewhere, but I never did find the book. My family told me I was under too much stress. They said I was imagining things. You need to go on a vacation, my dad told me one day over the phone. Get out of that house for a couple weeks. It would do you good. I remember agreeing with the sentiment at the time. But what I didn't divulge was that my work was ramping up, and I just didn't have the time for a vacation. They needed me on the floor. My PTO stacked up, and I rattled around inside the house. At least I had Murphy, and I was thankful for that. Over time, I started getting used to little things happening here and there around the house. Harmless things. At first, I thought it was neighborhood kids pulling pranks, but the duration and frequency of the events pretty much ruled that out. It just didn't add up. I started to think my house was haunted. And then my dog started acting strange. That's when things took a turn for the worse. One night, I was getting ready for bed. Per the usual, I made my rounds, turning off lights and making sure all the doors were locked. I was heading for my bedroom when I realized I hadn't seen Murphy in a while, which was weird. He was usually pretty close by. I whistled lightly, no response. I passed through the kitchen, and there he was, staring into the open door to the garage. The lights inside the garage were out. Murph just stood there, staring into the darkness. Even when I touched his head, he didn't budge. It was unsettling. Then, a few months ago, I was playing around on YouTube, and after turning off the TV, I heard Murphy quietly whimpering in the kitchen. This surprised me, so I went to check on him. He was running back and forth in the kitchen with this hunched-over posture. It was not like him to act like this. He was behaving as if he'd been scolded or attacked. I called his name, but he didn't respond. When I took a knee and tried to hug him, he just kept walking right over me, knocking me on my back. Then he threw up right in my face. I took him to the vet the next day, and he received a clean bill of health. Nothing to worry about, the vet told me. Murphy is a healthy, middle-aged dog. These things happen sometimes. The vet also said that my dog might be stressed, and dogs can act weird under stress. I just don't know what could be stressing him out. That weekend, Murph and I took a trip to the coast. I needed a change of scenery. Despite it being early September, the weather was warm and dry. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. The stresses of work and the house seemed to fade away as I watched Murph darting up and down the sand, chasing my frisbee excitedly. One wild throw, and he plunged into the water, briskly swimming with his chin up in the air. I laughed as he shook off right next to me, throwing salty seawater into my face. We shared a sandwich on the windy hiking trails of Cascade Head. We spent the night camping near Lincoln City. That night, as I sat in my folding chair, looking up at the stars, Murphy nuzzled his head beneath my hand. The dog I knew and loved was back. The next day, we headed home. We got back from the coast on Sunday evening. When I entered the house, something immediately felt wrong. I stopped in the entrance, just inside the front door, and looked around. Nothing looked amiss. I threw my shoes in the basket behind the door and walked into my kitchen. Behind me, I heard Murphy running down the hallway towards my bedroom on the other side of the house, his paws clicking rapidly on the hardwood. What's he running to? I wondered. Then I realized my kitchen chairs were all pushed over into one corner. That constricting feeling of dread began to grip my chest like slender, bony hands. I turned on my heels and jogged towards the hallway, afraid of what I might find. As I rounded the corner, I slid to a stop in my socks. Murphy was at the other end of the hallway, staring into my room. He was silent but alert, his tail straight up like a radio antenna. I slapped my thigh, calling out to him, but he didn't budge. He was transfixed on the empty room. After a few moments of silence watching Murph frozen there, I walked up and scratched behind his ear. Normally, he would put his head up in satisfaction, but this time, he didn't move an inch. A question ran through my head over and over again. What does he see? I decided to search my entire property just to be safe, and I couldn't find anything else out of place. I searched the backyard, the garage, even peeked in the attic. Nothing unusual, just the chairs. I didn't leave them like that. Had someone been in my house? And Murph, he just kept acting strange, staring into empty space like some bizarre canine sentinel. What does he see? That night, I spent several hours on the internet researching dog behaviors. You know how the internet has a way of answering your questions in 100 different ways? Your dog might be having seizures, said one site. It's probably stress. Get a dog-appeasing pheromone diffuser, said a different site. Another site suggested, give your dog a teaspoon of yogurt for his digestive bacteria. Finally, I found, dogs know when something bad is going to happen. Feeling flustered, I decided to stop researching dog behaviors for a while. I combed through real estate listings for houses in my area. I wasn't sure what I planned to do. If things got bad enough, maybe the only option would be to move. I really didn't want to move. Over the next month, I decided to dedicate my focus on work. I stayed for overtime when I could and put in long hours. The paychecks were great, and I was sufficiently distracted. Murphy seemed to be normal most of the time, even though he occasionally attached himself to an empty room, staring into space like he was entranced. Sometimes I found ways to snap him out of it. Other times he'd be frozen there for hours. Then, a week later, a noise woke me up in the middle of the night. It sounded like a chair clattering to the floor in the kitchen. I jerked awake, flooded with adrenaline. My bedside clock read 2 or 3 a.m. I don't exactly remember the time. I looked around the room, disoriented. The only light was a slice of moonlight coming through the space between my bedroom curtains. When my eyes focused a little better, I was startled to see Murphy planted in the entrance to my room, facing me. Just the front half of his body was lit by the moonlight. He was staring directly at me. He was standing perfectly still like a statue. His eyes locked with mine, and his lips were curled back a little, showing his teeth in a twisted smile. I could do nothing but just stare back at him. His chest heaved gently with every breath. After what seemed like an eternity, he turned around unnaturally slowly and glided silently out of the room. I got out of bed and went into the kitchen, turning on the lights. Sure enough, one of the chairs was knocked over to the floor. This time the chair was in front of the sink on the other side of the room. It was either taken there by someone or thrown there. Murph may have knocked it over, but he would have needed to carry it around the kitchen island to get it there. Look, I know what you're thinking. Murphy needs to see a veterinarian. Something is wrong with my dog, and he needs help. Rest assured, I share the sentiment. The next day, I took him back to the vet. They ran a slew of tests, beginning with cognitive reflexes and ending with blood work. They even asked if they could keep him overnight for some sleep monitoring. I wholeheartedly agreed. I just wanted my buddy back. As I drove away from the vet's office, I already felt some satisfaction that things were going to be better. That night, I slept better than I had in a long time. The next day was another story. It was nearly impossible to concentrate at work. The more I thought about Murph and what had been happening, the more my imagination conjured unpleasant outcomes. I'm an operations manager for a software company, so I have a staff that relies on me to be present and attentive. I found myself glancing at the clock every 5 minutes, and I spent all my breaks repeatedly checking my phone. I kept expecting a voicemail saying my dog was going to die or had some rare canine disease, but I didn't hear a thing. Regardless, I felt sick all day. During lunch, I heated up a Tupperware of leftovers in the microwave. When I pulled the food out, I nearly threw up from the smell. It wasn't spoiled. I just couldn't eat. So, into the garbage came one of my day-old mashed potatoes and broccoli. Finally, I got off work around 3 p.m. and sprinted to my car. I headed to the vet's office to pick up Murphy. When I arrived at the office, the receptionist shot me a troubled look. She looked as stressed as I felt. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I am here for my dog, Murphy." I told her wearily. "I left him here yesterday for some tests." And when the name Murphy escaped my lips, her look of stress became a look of horror. I watched her as she turned and walked over to an older man in orange scrubs. She said something to him in a hushed tone, getting very close to his face. The man then looked over to me, his brow furrowed. "What is it?" I asked nervously. He motioned for me to follow him. A flutter of anxiety crept through my body as I prepared myself to hear that my dog was dead. I was sure this would be the news I was about to receive. I followed the man into a small room with 2 chairs and a small table, nothing else. He shut the door once I was seated. "Look, I'm sorry for this, but I needed to make sure we could talk privately about what is happening here," the man started. "And what exactly is happening here?" I said a little more frantically than I intended. "Oh, well, Murphy disappeared this afternoon. About an hour ago," the vet said slowly. "He was here all night. We monitored his sleep patterns, and then today, when we were preparing him for discharge, he was left alone for about 10 minutes. When we returned, he was well gone." My stomach twisted into knots. "He's gone?" I managed to choke out. "We have searched the building and the surrounding area. We're so sorry. the vet said as his bushy gray eyebrows pinched his forehead together. This has never happened before. I didn't stay to let him finish. I stood up and left the small room, heading for the exit. A younger vet in white scrubs whirled around when he saw me approaching the waiting room. He stood directly in my path and asked me to stop, but I shoved him aside. His back hit the wall with a thud. The startled receptionist ran to his side. I jogged out to my car and sped off toward my house. Thankfully, I lived close to the vet's office, and it only took me 10 minutes to get home. What did I expect to find at my house? Well, to be completely honest, I am not sure what I expected. My head was spinning, and it was hard to think. I wanted to collect my thoughts and formulate a plan to find Murphy. When I arrived home, I immediately headed into the kitchen. Slamming a small glass on the counter, I poured myself a whiskey. My hand trembled as I raised the glass to my lips. After a few seconds deep in thought, it hit me like a bag of rocks. Most collar had a GPS tracker built in. Katie bought it when she moved in. I remember telling her at the time that it was a waste of money. Seriously, we used to call him Velcro because he wouldn't leave my side. I never used a collar before, so I had to download the tracker app to my phone. After a few minutes, I entered my information and the app loaded for a few moments. Then it showed a blip on the map. The blip was on my house. No, that had to be wrong, I thought, and reloaded the app. Again, it showed the blip blinking steadily on my house. I called out to Murphy, my voice echoing through the empty rooms. I searched the house from top to bottom. My dog was nowhere in sight. I grabbed a flashlight and headlamp and headed outside. It was just getting dark as I scouted my half-acre backyard. My voice cut through the cold night air as I called out for Murphy. I searched behind my shed, under the deck, and around the sides of the house. I got down on my hands and knees and looked into the crawl space vents cut into the foundation of the house. Finally, something caught my eye. I could see a tuft of fur just out of view from one crawl space vent next to my driveway. It was Murphy's fur color. My hands trembled as I pulled the wooden cover off the crawl space entrance next to my deck. The opening was only about 1.5 feet high. I tightened my headlamp and laid down on my stomach, crawling into the narrow passage. Immediately, an unspeakable odor filled the air. I gagged a little as the smell of decay assaulted my nostrils. I suddenly realized I was still wearing my dress clothes from work. They were now smeared with dark, oily earth from under the house. I rolled on my side and pulled off my tie. I did my best to wrap the tie around my face to cover my mouth and nose. It didn't work very well, but it was honestly better than nothing. It smelled awful down there. A tangle of daunting thoughts twisted through my mind as I crawled to the other side of the property where I saw the tuft of fur. What am I smelling? It smells like death. Is Murph down here? It can't be Murphy. He was fine a couple hours ago. How did they lose my dog? I periodically called out for Murphy through the dusty crawl space. It was hard to see very far ahead due to hanging furnace ducts. There were patches of insulation drooping down here and there as well, obstructing my view. Something I noticed which struck me as odd were the things down there. I saw a beat-up red wagon, like a radio flyer pushed into a corner. There was a golf club bent into a U shape. Next to it was a badly stained doll in a red frilly dress. I saw a wooden comb and a pair of rusty scissors too. Strange to see so many old possessions just lying around under my house. I finally reached the back corner of the crawl space. Pushing a heap of insulation aside, I saw what I was looking for. Murph's collar was laying on the ground in the corner, and attached to it was a sizable chunk of golden fur. I snatched up the collar and examined the fur carefully. There was no flesh or blood etched, just a pile of fur. The collar was still buckled. It just didn't make sense. Clutching the collar, I crawled out. When I got back into the house, I peeled off my dirty clothes and threw them into the laundry room. I checked my phone on the kitchen counter and saw there were 3 voicemails from the veterinary clinic, a text from my dad, and a notification from the GPS app. Pouring myself another whiskey, I played the first voicemail from the vet on speakerphone. This is Kim from the Willamette Falls Veterinary Clinic. Our deepest apologies for the incident today. Please understand, We have protocols in place for unexpected events like this. I know it's hard, but we would like to go over some legal documents, and we would ask that you read and sign. Irritated, I shut off the voicemail. My head was spinning, and I couldn't think straight. I checked the text from my dad. "Hey, bud, just checking in. You get that vacation yet?" I had the urge to cry, and I fought it back. I don't remember exactly when I went to bed. I do remember finishing off the bottle of whiskey at some point. I suppose getting hammered didn't do much to steady my spinning head, but I didn't care. I was exhausted and filled with worry for my dog. It was just easier to fall into the bottle and forget my problems. Now I was awoken by a sound in the kitchen, and I sat up in bed. God, my mouth tasted like I had swallowed sour milk. I nearly gagged with disgust. It was almost enough to distract me from my splitting headache. Just then, the sound again. A scratching from the kitchen. Slow, deliberate scratching on the floor. Someone in the house. I strained to hear more. And then, a shape came into view at the end of the hallway leading to my bedroom. It was 30 feet away or so, and in the dark, but I could tell it was too small to be a person. The shape moved very slowly and glided along, as if it were on the surface of a pool or something. I instinctively pushed myself back in my bed until I was pressed against the headboard. The shape moved steadily towards my room. As it passed into the doorway, it was finally illuminated by the slice of light coming through my window. It was Murphy, sort of. I recognized what looked like my dog, but its face was wrong somehow. That same awful smile from before, its lips twisted back to show its teeth. Murphy's eyes bulged like black marbles in his head, threatening to pop out onto the floor and roll away. His fur was blotchy and matted down in places, wet with some unidentifiable liquid. He glided forward slowly like he was stuck in slow motion. As he moved, his joints bent unnaturally like a spider's legs, tapping gently on the hardwood floor. I tried to move, but I was paralyzed in place. Murphy reached the foot of my bed, and silently his front paws clamped down on the frame. He hoisted himself up so he was eye level with me. His tongue bobbed uselessly for his slack mouth. Something dark oozed from his mouth onto my blankets. I could smell his breath. It smelled like decay, that smell from the crawl space. A low growling moan crawled up from the depths of Murphy's foul-smelling maw. My vision blurred. I felt myself slipping from consciousness, and I blacked out. I awoke to gentle daylight the next morning. It still felt as if my head had made friends with a sledgehammer at some point in the night. Every swallow was like sandpaper. I rolled out of bed and shuffled into the kitchen. The empty whiskey bottle sat on the counter proudly, as if to take credit for my malaise. Groaning loudly, I swallowed some ibuprofen with water and turned on the coffee machine. Outside, chickadees excitedly serenaded each other in the morning light. Then I remembered it. That thing that came to my room last night. What the Christ was that? A nightmare? I found my phone on the counter and squinted at the screen. 2 voicemails left from the veterinary clinic. I listened to the first one. It sounded like the receptionist. "This is Kim again from the veterinary clinic. We may have information regarding the whereabouts of your dog Murphy. Please give us a call as soon as possible. Again, we understand this is a difficult time, and we would ask that you come back to the office to read over and sign our legal disclaimers. Thank you." I swallowed hard and skipped to the final voicemail. This time it was a man's voice. "This is James from the veterinary clinic. Your dog, Murphy, has returned to the clinic. We have him safe and sound. Please come in as soon as possible so we can discharge him to you. You don't need to call ahead. Just come in." I blinked in disbelief. The coffee maker sputtered softly. I got dressed as quickly as I could and ran to my car. I was halfway to the clinic when I realized I was still wearing my slippers. Anxiety prickled my chest as I pulled into the parking lot. I caught a glimpse of my face in the mirror as I rolled into the closest parking spot. Well, I looked like hell. I probably didn't smell great, either. I hadn't showered since before work yesterday. Ah shit. Work. They'd be wondering why I wasn't in the office. I would have started an hour ago. Strangely, I didn't care. I just wanted to get Murphy back. The real Murphy. Sure enough, Murphy had reappeared at the clinic. He was found locked in the same kennel he had been in when he disappeared. Another dog was locked in the kennel when Murphy reappeared, so they were locked in the same cage together. Where had he gone? Nobody could tell. I signed some legal documents and a waiver, then we left the clinic together. On the way home, Murphy stuck his head out the window and squinted into the wind. He just looked so happy and, well, normal. My mind loosened a bit, and I began to feel as if things might actually go back to being normal now. At home, I threw my shoes into the basket behind the door. Murphy trotted into the house behind me. He walked over to his bowl next to the garage and started lapping up water. I hung my keys on the hook by the hallway. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air. I poured myself a cup and sat at the table, listening to the gentle sound of Murphy drinking. What was that thing in my house last night? I thought. One thing I'm sure of, it was not my dog. Fifth story. My sister brought home a stray dog. There's something terribly wrong with it. It had been raining for most of the day. Yesterday's forecast was for a light shower, but this was torrential. I peeked out the window, and in the darkness of the late afternoon, I could see a river of rainwater cascading down either side of the street. My parents were getting worried about my sister. Emily had spent the day at a friend's house and was supposed to be back an hour ago. Just as my dad was about to get in his car and go for a drive around the block to find her, the front door opened. Emily walked in dressed in her yellow raincoat. Much to my parents' chagrin, she was holding onto the worn collar of an old, soaking wet dog. The thing was a mongrel, but I could make out the Alsatian in it. Maybe some golden retriever. As I tried to work it out, I made a mental note to put dog breeder down on my list of career interests for school. My parents exchanged apprehensive glances as Emily smiled awkwardly and explained how she found him shivering in the rain on the side of the road. There was something about its eyes, she said, that made her instantly feel sorry for the poor guy. My dad knelt by the dog and had a look at its collar. It was battered, its red color fading, and it had no name, phone number, or address written on it. My father stood up with a sigh and told Emily that he'd bring the mutt to the vet on Thursday to see if it had been chipped, and for the 5 days until then, looking after it would be her responsibility. Emily beamed at my dad and took the dog into the kitchen to towel it down. Later on that evening, she brought it back into the living room and informed us that his name was Buster. My father warned against getting too attached, but she didn't listen. She spent the rest of the day playing with Buster and sending pictures of him to her friends. That night, Buster slept on a makeshift bed of old blankets and cardboard in the kitchen. My parents prayed that he wouldn't make a mess of the place at night. Emily hugged Buster and gave him another treat before rushing off to her room. In the morning, all was well. It looked like Buster hadn't moved an inch. The dopey guy barely looked up at us when we crowded into the kitchen for breakfast. Immediately, Emily knelt beside him, rubbing his tummy and stroking his fur. I think Emily was too afraid of taking Buster for a walk, just in case she bumped into his owners and they dragged him away from her. The garden had been turned to mud the day before, and there wasn't a chance in hell that my mother would let that dog back in the house if he had a trace of muck on his paws. So he, like the rest of us, spent that day cooped up inside. Not that he seemed to mind. My dad cooked up a lamb chop for Buster that night, at Emily's request. It was the most animated I've seen him. His eyes lit up as it was placed in front of him, and we all erupted into laughter as he tore into it. That night, I jolted awake. The radio alarm clock on my bedside cabinet informed me, in analog red light, that it was 4:37. I lay there, but quickly began to fall back to sleep. I could have sworn I heard something moving around in the hallway. I assumed it was my dad, stumbling to the bathroom in a drunken stupor, and for the second time that night, sleep took me. I spent most of the next day hanging out with friends around town. We rode our bikes, threw stones at the windows of the old house on Mill Street, and dared each other to shoplift from the local off-brand gas station. I made off with a packet of apple-flavored chewing gum. When I came home, things felt different. Hostile. I didn't want to ask what happened, but before I could slink off to my room, my mother told me. Emily had accidentally knocked over my grandfather's urn while playing with Buster in the front room. I suppressed a chuckle at the thought of how much trouble she'd be getting in. Mature of me, I know. That evening there was silence around the dinner table, broken only by Buster's whining. I woke up again that night. This time, I swung myself out of bed. My mouth was dry, and my breath left a stale taste at the back of my throat. I wandered downstairs to the kitchen to get a glass of water. I tried to be as silent as possible, not wanting to disturb the sleeping dog. Buster slept soundly in his little bed, and I knew a freight train going past wouldn't wake him. I poured a glass of water and drank it in a continuous gulp. Then an idea came to me. I crouched by the cabinet my dad kept his whiskey in. I opened it, trying not to let the hinges creak. I picked out a bottle and stood up. I gently unscrewed the cap and took a sip. I coughed and choked and spluttered. As I went for another sip, I heard movement upstairs. I knew my father would kill me if he caught me drinking. I hastily put the cap back on and placed it back in the cupboard. I walked out the kitchen, desperate not to make a noise. Just before I began ascending the stairs, I heard the door to my parents' room open. I quickly turned around and hid in the living room. I heard my father walk down the stairs and into the kitchen. My heart was beating like a tribal drum as I hurried out of the living room, and I stepped, agonizingly loudly, up each creaky step back to my bedroom. I thought I had made it, but just as I was pushing my bedroom door open, I heard a voice behind me. It was my father. He'd popped his head out of his bedroom. He asked if it was me moving around. I told him that I'd just gone downstairs to get a glass of water. He told me to keep it down, and before he retreated back into the darkness of his room, I saw my mother stirring in the bed behind him. He closed the door. That morning I woke up with a migraine. Nothing too major, but it was a drawback from what would have otherwise been a great day. My sister was at some dance club, my mother was visiting the solicitor in town, and my father had gone golfing. On this rare occasion, I had the house to myself. Well, me and the dog. I found a strongly worded note on the kitchen table when I woke up. It was left by Emily, telling me how I should feed and entertain Buster while she was gone. I crumpled it up and attempted to throw it into the bin from across the room, missing horribly. I made myself the unhealthiest breakfast I could think of. I took it into the living room to eat while I settled down to watch a film, Dan O'Bannon's Return of the Living Dead. That's how I spent the morning. Later on, I took my empty plate into the kitchen. I figured if my mother saw that I cleaned the dishes, she wouldn't be as critical when she found the crumbs. I walked past Buster, who was slumped in his usual stop in the corner of the room, on a bed of now dirty sheets. In a joking manner, I asked him how his day was while I washed up. Obviously, I got no reply. I remember my sister's note and set a half-dry glass down while I fetched Buster some treats. I didn't know where Emily kept them, so I grabbed a slice of overly processed ham from the fridge. I crouched beside him and dangled it in front of his snout, teasing him. There was no response. No slow opening of the eyelids. No methodic wag of the tail. There were no signs of life at all. I gasped and put my hand on his stomach, trying to feel it rise with his breath or a heartbeat, anything. To my horror, his abdomen began to compress when I did, like a limp, deflating balloon. He felt hollow, empty. I scrambled to my feet and stumbled backwards. As I put my hand on the counter, I knocked over a glass. It shattered on the kitchen floor, but Buster didn't so much as flinch. I panicked and ran up to my room. I took my phone from my bedside cabinet and hastily rang my mother. It rang for a brief moment before she picked up. I managed to stutter out that there was something wrong with the dog, that it was an emergency. She assured me that she had just picked up Emily and would be home in 10 minutes. And with that, she hung up. I set my phone down and paced around the room. As I was thinking, I heard a noise coming from the first floor. It sounded like someone moving around. I assumed it was my mother, home earlier than she estimated. I made my way downstairs to greet her, hurrying over the creaking steps. There was no one. The door was still locked and I, as far as I knew, was alone in the house. I heard the now familiar wag of Buster's tail as he came bounding up to me from the hall. I looked at him puzzled as he nestled his head into my leg. I stroked him behind the ears as he mewed low. I then heard the equally familiar jangling of keys as the front door was unlocked. My mother stepped inside, pumping her umbrella. Emily, who was close beside her, ran to Buster and dropped to her knees as soon as she saw him. She hugged him tight and whispered in his flea-bitten ear. I could see her eyes were red, raw from crying. My mother asked me what the big emergency was, and I paused before answering. I explained that he had been unresponsive, but he seems fine now. My mother let out a long, drawn-out sigh as she made her way past us and into the kitchen. She called my name, frustrated, when she saw the broken shards of glass on the kitchen floor. I had forgotten about that. Emily spent the rest of the day in her room with the dog. At dinner, neither me or my mother mentioned anything about Buster's false alarm. We just let my dad witter on about improving his backswing, whatever that meant. For the third night in a row, I jolted awake in the small hours of the morning. I groaned at the abrupt ending of a good dream, tossing and turning until I found a comfy position. As I tried to get back to sleep, I began to feel a presence. It was the feeling you get during an awkward silence, when you become painfully aware of the other person. I sat up in bed and rubbed my eyes, trying to adjust them to the darkness. There was someone in the corner of my room. I was certain of it. I could make out the vague shadow-covered silhouette standing just beyond the foot of my bed. I was almost paralyzed with fear, but my right hand managed to creep over to my bedside cabinet. I fumbled as I felt for the familiar switch of the lamp. Just before I turned it on, the figure in my room bolted. I recoiled in shock as I realized my half-asleep mind had been right. Someone had been standing there, watching. As the moon emerged from a bank of clouds, my room was briefly lit with a dull glow. In that half-light, I saw the outline of a tall man slink out of my room and into the darkness of the hall. I didn't realize I was screaming until my father burst into my room moments later. He switched the lights on, which burned my eyes. He held me and asked what was wrong. With snot and tears dripping down my face, I managed to stutter out that there had been someone in my room. At this, my dad turned and ran back into his room. His caring embrace was quickly replaced with my mother's. He emerged with a baseball bat in his hands, gasping it so hard his knuckles were white. My mother went to check on Emily. She made me come with her, not waiting to let her children out of her sight. Me barged into Emily's room. She was already awake, sitting upright in bed. My mother fired a barrage of questions at her. Dazed, Emily told us that she hadn't seen anything. My father came into the room 10 minutes later. He informed us that he did a sweep of the house and found nothing. No signs of a break-in, no mysterious intruder. He brought me back to my room. Once I was in bed, he sat by my side and explained to me that I probably just had a bad dream. He said there was nothing to be afraid of and joked that if someone did break into the house, they'd soon be scared off by Buster, the world's greatest guard dog. Eventually, I mustered the courage to fall back asleep. The next morning, everyone in the family was noticeably tired. Even the dog. We greeted each other with yawns and joked about the previous night's events. I didn't know that this was the start of the last truly happy day of my life. My parents went out shopping. Emily took Buster for his first proper walk, and I spent most of the day gaming. It was a normal day. I've had dozens just like it. We had chicken breasts and bland steamed vegetables for dinner. Wednesday was family night, so after dinner we came together in the living room to play a board game. Tonight, it was Cluedo. Buster was curled up at Emily's feet. My father thought then was a good time to remind her that tomorrow he was bringing the dog to the vet and would hopefully reunite him with his real owners. At this, Emily screamed that she was his real owner. She stormed out of the room, Buster following close behind. As soon as she slammed the door behind her, my dad signed. He said he knew my sister would get too attached to that dog. This was the sour note the day ended on. At 10, I did my usual routine. I brushed my teeth, changed into my pajamas, and listened to music for half an hour or so before turning over and going to sleep. As I expected, I woke up again in the middle of the night. This time, I was too afraid to move, too afraid to open my eyes and see what could be lurking in my room. Instead, I kept them tightly shut and tried desperately to go back to sleep. After laying in bed for what felt like hours, but must have only been 20 minutes, I decided to open my eyes. I was filled with a directionless dread as I slowly peeped out over my duvet. Since I had woken up, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that I was being watched. As I pulled the covers away from my face, I saw who had been staring at me. My bedroom door was wide open, and sitting perfectly still in the doorway was Buster. His head was craned slightly and looking directly at me. I chuckled to myself, realizing that I had been terrified over nothing. I swung my legs out of bed and got up. I took Buster by the collar and began to lead him back downstairs to his bed. As I walked down the hall, I noticed that the door to my sister's room was ajar. I brought Buster into the kitchen and watched as he lay down on the crumpled mess of cardboard and old blankets that he slept on. I smiled as he slumped his head onto his paws and closed his dreary eyes. I wouldn't exactly call him my best friend, but I'd miss him after tomorrow. I turned to leave to crawl back into bed and finally get some rest, but something caught my eye from out of the kitchen window. I leaned against the sill and looked out onto the cold night. The moon was a perfect crescent, half hidden by the clouds. Light pollution from the nearby city robbed the sky of stars, but as I stared into the darkness, I caught a glimpse of a shooting star. As I gazed in awe to see if I could see another one, I saw someone. There was a person leaning against the fence along our front driveway. I quickly realized it was Emily. I could make much out in the darkness, but I could see that she looked nervous. I was about to open the window and call out to her when I heard something behind me. I turned around and realized it was coming from the dog. I assumed he had yelped in his sleep, maybe stuck in some bad dream, but then I noticed something else. His skin was moving. Rather, there was something moving around just under the surface of his skin. I didn't have time to think what it could be before I saw the long, crimson-red fingers protrude from his stomach. They grabbed onto either side of the now gaping wound and parted his abdomen like curtains. Once the opening was wide enough, the unnaturally long arm reached out, snaking across the kitchen floor until it grabbed the dining table's leg. It held on to it tightly as it began to pull the rest of it out. I couldn't comprehend how something so large could have fit inside of that animalistic facade. Eventually, it was fully out and stood upright. The figure must have been at least 3 meters tall. It was hunched over where it met the ceiling. It looked like it had been skinned. Its lanky body was made up of exposed sinew and muscle. The thing's eyes were milk white and bulging out of its vaguely dog-shaped head. It was grotesque. With a streak of urine running down my leg, I turned around and ran as fast as I could upstairs. I burst into my parents' bedroom and stood in front of their bed, screaming and wailing about some monster. They were both shaken awake at my outpour of terror. My father was calm at first. He tried to sit me down and tell me that it had all been a bad dream, like the night before. I pushed him away and tried to articulate between screams that there was a monster downstairs and we had to leave. My father quickly became furious. His anger at me was only amplified by his tiredness. He grabbed my shaking hand and began to shout that at 14, I was too old for this, for any of this. But I was hysterical, and his attempt at reasoning did nothing. As I kept on wailing, he and my mother began to half lead, half drag me back into my own room. Kicking and screaming, I fell to my bedroom floor. I jolted at the noise of the slamming of my door and got to my feet. With tears streaking down my red cheeks, I pounded the door. I heard my father's voice on the other side, pleading with me to calm down. Our shouting reached a fever pitch, and then silence. We both stopped and listened out for the repetition of the noise that had brought our heated argument to an end. The dull, thudding noise came again, this time accompanied by a shrill creak. I realized it was the sound of something climbing the stairs. I took a tentative step back as the noise drew closer and closer. In a weak voice, I heard my father stutter, What are you?" I knew what he had seen. I've spent the last 11 years blocking out the memory of what came next. There was screaming and pleading, the sound of flesh ripping and bone shattering. I sat motionless on the carpet of my bedroom floor as viscose blood began seeping in from under the door. The sounds or carnage stopped, and I held my breath as there was perfect silence once again. This silence was broken by the sound of my door slowly creaking open. I was petrified with fear. I could do anything. Couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't breathe. The thing opened my door crack before stopping. The slowly thudding noise returned as it walked away from the scene until I couldn't hear anything more. I stayed welded to the spot for a minute or two before grief hit me like a bus. I began crying until my eyes were raw. I stood up and took my phone from my bedside cabinet. I dialed 911 and desperately tried to explain what had happened. I glanced out my window and my jaw went slack. Walking down the middle of our street was the creature, caked in blood the same shade as its taut skin. Holding its hand and walking next to it was Emily. She stared up at it with affection. The two were illuminated by the street lights, and I saw that the creature was holding the fur suit that had once been Buster in the talons of its other hand. I watched as they walked down the street, across the sidewalk, and into the forest that surrounded my neighborhood. That was the last time I saw my sister. Within the hour, the police came. They cordoned off the area and took me in. I spent the next few years in foster care. The official statement they had given was that it was a kidnapping gone wrong. Only I and the officers and coroner who saw my parents' remains knew that it was something much more sinister. That was 11 years ago. Tonight, I finished writing this before I begin a journey that I should have undertaken a long, long time ago. Emily is still out there, somewhere, and I'm going to find her. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.